All right, men, this is it! The last bastion! I beseech you all, it's imperative that you give your lives for the cause and protection of this land. For should you not, and this beast breach our walls, all humanity as we know it shall fall. Fight their armies, slay their beholders, and wade through until we find the god beyond all of this. Then leave him to me. I alone will face him, and I will defeat him!
I'm gonna cut you off there. Look, listen, I like the idea of your backstory of you being this unkillable demon king or whatever, but is it really appropriate to be this powerful before the campaign's even started?
Yes, of course, because I shall slay all. I will take down any threat that dares threaten my kingdom and will carve the way towards my path.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. There are other players in this campaign, and, well, frankly, I'm not sure your character would fit. You know, progressing with the party and going through all of these trials and tribulations with a group of people and growing in power with them is kind of the point of D&D. And also we're level 1.
Other players? No, this is unheard of. They might ruin my plans. They might interfere with my goals. I cannot have this. I will not have this.
Ooh, glad to have him gone. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah, D&D story. Right, got it. Hello and welcome back to another RPG horror story, where today we'll be going through another character who happens to be an edgelord and also just happens to have a lot of main character syndrome. This person is seemingly a writer, and so they should know what good story and bad stories are and what good relationships between characters are and are not. Right?
No.
Today's story is called Awful Wannabe Writer Makes Mary Sue Edgelord Character, then refuses to even play due to his own ego. This one was written by our lovely friend u/routine_champion_152, and it was even cross-posted to r/KieronTheKiwiVO, so thank you so much for doing that, and if you want your stories to be read on the channel, then go ahead and follow the link down in the description to r/KieronTheKiwiVO. Oh, and while you're down there, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. It's absolutely free, and you can always unsubscribe later. But if you don't, here's a cute monster. Now feel free to kick back, relax, and enjoy the dogs barking in my background. Now kick back, relax, and enjoy the edgy writer with main character syndrome. TLDR, cringy guy with a background in bad writing makes a really edgy and overpowered D&D character, asks me for feedback, gets annoyed when I suggest some changes might need to be made, then throws a tantrum and refuses to play when he realizes that the entire game won't revolve around his fun and his character. Before I begin this story, I've a confession to make. Personally, I've always found edgy D&D characters, and the people who play them, to be rather fascinating. Mainly because I find it hilarious when people try to make these super cool, lone wolf badasses, only for it to backfire on them in hilarious fashion when they don't get their way, and no one can take them seriously, causing them to throw a temper tantrum. However, despite playing D&D for over 12 years and reading many RPG horror stories about them, I've never encountered a character like this in the wild. A friend of mine once played a pretty edgy character, an outcast drow wild magic sorcerer who got his magic due to being half demon, but he actually turned out really well and was loved by myself and all my other players, mainly because he kept his edge at just the right level and had more character than just hating everything. However, a few months ago, it happened. Dear readers, allow me to introduce you to Damien Voldegar, Order of the Mutant Bloodhunter, multi-classed with a fiend-packed warlock. No, you didn't misread that, this is real. And well, do I really have to say more? I'm obviously joking. You can absolutely have a Bloodhunter and Warlock characters who aren't edgelords, same as with any other class. It all depends on the execution, and I've personally seen characters with those exact subclasses both done brilliantly. But Damien and his player were just something else. Plus, I think he's indicative of a much deeper problem with the people who bring characters like this to the table. Brace yourself, reader, because this is going to be bad in the best way possible. So, someone I knew, a guy I wasn't quite friends with but had known for about 4 years, mentioned to me he was interested in getting into D&D. I offered to show him the ropes a little bit, and after we set up a time to discuss things, I mentioned one of the things we'd be discussing was character creation. To my surprise, he said he'd already had a character, and asked me if I could look at what he'd made and give him my thoughts. I agreed, but I have another confession. There was an ulterior motive to my actions here. You see, I'd known this guy in writing circles, fanfiction specifically, and knew that he had a really bad habit of making Mary Sue characters who were basically self-inserts for whatever fandom he was writing about, including, but not limited to, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Harry Potter. And, in said stories, he would rewrite and undo entire elements of the canon, either to make his OC the center of the universe, or simply because he didn't like them. Usually both. For example, Game of Thrones fans, you know the Tyrion-Tywin dynamic? The rivalry that was so interesting and compelling, especially in the books, and that gave you insight into the mindset of two people that was rooted in how their upbringing shaped who they are, leading to so many great moments and a compelling payoff. Gone. In his fanfic, Tyrion and Tywin were buddy-buddy for no established reason, and there was no dislike between them at all, with Tywin even accepting Tyrion as his heir. Eat your heart out, Season 8. Also, his Star Wars OC takes Anakin's place as Palpatine's protege, then overthrows him and goes on to rebuild the Sith Empire. So, given this guy's track record, although to his credit he had been showing some small improvements over the years I knew him, I decided to have a look at what he'd made. Without wishing to sound too authoritarian, I was planning to see what he had come up with, and if it would work in a D&D game, fine. And if I felt it wouldn't, I was hoping to iron out some bumps with some constructive feedback. And so, over a Discord chat, he introduced me to Damien, and it wasn't long before I knew I had my work cut out for me. Damien was a wood elf with a soldier background, and his story was that he was a rough and tough orphan living on the streets of the capital city of an elven kingdom. So badass that he apparently killed a fully grown man in a fight when he himself was only 9 years old. He was found and taken in by a special forces unit of mutagen-using super soldiers within the kingdom's army and trained to be one of them. And of course, he not only survived the ridiculously grueling training methods, but proved to be the best of them, even becoming an officer and solo killing multiple dangerous monsters like trolls, mind flayers, beholders, and demons. Also, he gained a great deal of fame and became a local hero due to his first and most famous kill, 1v1ing a massive hydra, then skinning the beast to wear its hide as a cloak. And all of this before even starting the campaign. Then, as Damien grew into adulthood, the king himself took an interest in him, inviting him to the palace to speak with him. Turns out this guy was actually Damien's uncle, who had usurped the throne by murdering the previous king and queen, Damien's parents, and tried to dispose of the prince, but failed. He then tried to finish what he started by sicking his personal guard on Damien, barely succeeding in bringing him down, after a fight scene where Damien killed all of the guardsmen save 2, who'd be mini-bosses in his personal storyline later on, and disposing of the Bloodhunter's body in a river. Damien didn't stay dead for long though. As his soul lingered on the edge of the afterlife, he was approached by Bel, outcast archdevil and the former ruler of Avernus. He had taken an interest in Damien for his combat prowess and apparently sympathized with him over also being usurped, as Bel had also suffered that humiliation. And so, he proposed a deal: power and the chance for Damien to take back his birthright in exchange for allowing Bel to possess his body. Damien agreed, and so rose from the grave, suffused with the Archdevil's power, and is now out to regain his throne and get revenge against his uncle. This has also changed him physically, apparently giving him sharpened teeth and eyes that, and I quote, have lizard pupils that burn like hellfire. I think I just cut myself on that edge. So, to summarize, we basically have a stew made from mixing Witcher's Geralt of Rivia, Mutant Monster Slayer Super Soldier, Shadow of Mordor's Talion, dead warrior coming back to life due to being possessed by a magical being, Warhammer Fantasy's Malus Darkblade, an elf and the demonic nature of his patron, and the Lion King Simba, exiled prince reclaiming his kingdom from his uncle. Mixed together, served with a side of self-insert, and horrifically overseasoned with wannabe badass. Now, just to be clear, I'm not going to go after the guy for taking inspiration from other characters. After all, let's not beat around the bush, we all know this is a core part of D&D. Plus, I'm not sure he was even aware of Malus Darkblade's existence. Also, credit where it's due for him, he had done at least some research and actually chose what I thought was a mildly interesting patron. As far as I'm aware in the Forgotten Realms, Bel isn't actually cast out of the Nine Hells, but an archdevil who might be doing this as part of a plan to gain his throne back, playing and manipulating Damien to seek power and pretending to sympathize with him after also having been disposed of his own position. Tons of potential there for an interesting warlock-patron dynamic, if you did it right. However, I say this now because they're the only thing I'm gonna cut him some slack on, because here's where the problem gets worse. Side note, by the way, Damien was described as having silver hair and, following his resurrection, red eyes. So, I have to ask, what is it with edgelord characters and the albino look? I've noticed this quite a few times where an edgy character is also an albino. Is there some kind of connection? I'm aware of Elric in Melnibone, the OG fantasy albino, but I'm fairly sure that these guys making edgy characters probably aren't. But I digress. When I heard this character concepts, there were concerns I felt I had to raise after he'd finished his initial pitch. To be clear, I phrased these as suggestions and accompanied each one with suggested alternatives. I wasn't just saying, your character sucks, and listing all the reasons why. But here goes. Firstly, I explained that Damien being so powerful before the story even started wouldn't be likely fly in an actual game, since the idea that he was already a badass killing machine didn't leave the character with anywhere to go during the actual campaign itself. The experience of becoming more powerful alongside your party is something I think is integral to D&D, especially for forming bonds between characters and players, both due to the feeling of accomplishing something together. So I suggested Damien may be more of a mid-rank blood hunter in his unit as a means of getting around this. This was related to the second concern I raised. There wasn't a clear explanation as to how Damien managed to avoid his uncle's coup. Was he smuggled out of the palace by loyalists as a baby? And if they did that, why would they apparently abandon their prince to live as a feral child? They could have raised him themselves, or at the very least left him in an orphanage. The guy then said that he escaped himself, to which I replied that surely if this happened when he was old enough to escape, surely he'd remember something about his mum and dad. He apparently doesn't, so how does that work? One thing I also wanted to ask about, but never got the chance to, was how Damien can apparently 1v1 beholders and demons, but not a group of guards. The math ain't mathin', Chief. But that never came about, because while I was suggesting ways to get around these concerns, I could tell that the guy was getting frustrated. Even as I said something to the effect of, you might want to sort these out to make things easier for your DM to work the story into a campaign, and I frankly started getting the impression that he didn't like, or couldn't take, criticism. And his defensive response was legitimately to just start listing off things his character had done in his backstory, not even seeming to pay attention to what I was saying, almost like he was in some kind of trance. Some of the ones that I remember include 1. Damien having a pet red dragon that he raised since it was an egg and uses as his personal mount. Not a drake, an actual dragon. 2. Him fighting in an outright invasion of his homeland by an orc army and turning the tide of the battle single-handedly by descending from on high on his dragon and cutting down the orc chieftain and all of his bodyguards. And number 3, love interests. Apparently Damien has a hot girlfriend and he literally described it as being like Batman and Catwoman's relationship, right down to his girlfriend being a career thief who uses a whip as her main weapon. He also said something about Damien rescuing a nobleman's beautiful daughter from a drow enclave that was raiding the kingdom's lands, wiping out the dark elves to the last man. He then brought the daughter back home, and they also began a romance. So, he has a harem. All of this was obviously setting off a deafening level of Mary Sue alarms in my head, and while over the course of this conversation I was really starting to wonder what I could do with this, I decided not to give up. So, instead of running the risk of making it feel like I was picking holes in his idea, although I don't think that is what I was doing, I decided to ask him where he was planning for his character's personal storyline to go. This got him excited again, and he went into a long and detailed description of how Damien would return to overthrow his uncle and reclaim his kingdom, including some very detailed descriptions about how his character would besiege the city with an army, fight his way through the castle single-handedly to find his uncle cowering on the throne, and after fighting and disarming him, he'd drive his sword into his uncle's heart and send his soul to the Nine Hells. Then, after becoming the rightful king and taking his girlfriend as his queen, I have no idea which one of the two he meant by this, by the way, he had an even higher goal in mind. Although his explanation wasn't so clear for how this would happen, he was planning for Damien and Belle to return to the Nine Hells, regain Avernus from Zariel, and then go on to overthrow Asmodeus and make themselves the new ruler of the Hells. Now, I'm not a Forgotten Realms lore expert, so I'm not going to say anything on whether that would even be possible. But over the top as it was certainly a fun idea, and I said as such, telling him, okay, that's actually kinda cool. I'm sure if it fit the campaign you and your party were in, your DM could work that in. His response was, what do you mean? To which, over a bit of back and forth, I explained that usually in D&D, the DM will have the story of the campaign they're telling and will work in player backstories as they go where appropriate. That's how I do it at least. Upon hearing this, the guy started to lose it, first in a confused, panicking sense as he tried to puzzle out that Damien wouldn't be at the center of the campaign, and then he seemed to start getting increasingly angry when I mentioned the other players would be tagging along. He might have to play through their characters' backstories as well, and how things might not go exactly as he wanted. For context, I ended up saying something to the effect of, sometimes in D&D, things don't go to plan. I've had a couple of situations where I've been, hell yeah, this is going to be awesome, and then the dice don't pan out. But that is just part of the game. This didn't help though. He started raising his voice, saying that he was worried that other players and characters would ruin his story and that the dice might screw up what he had in mind. I tried to calm him down by saying that the other player characters in D&D are usually invested in helping the rest of their party, unless one of them is a real arsehat, and that the different strengths of a varied party usually help make things easier and make a party better at progressing the story. After all, I said, no character can be the best at everything. And then shit hit the fan. The dude outright yelled at me, accused me of calling his character a Mary Sue, and ranting about how everyone he asks to look at his character ruins his ideas by wanting to change them. One bit I remember him saying after he accused me of saying Damien was a Mary Sue was, if I hear those words one more time, I'm going to explode. Mate, you said them, not me. But in all seriousness, if I wasn't trying to be constructive in my critique of Damien, I would consider him such. We have a character who is extremely overpowered for the situation he is in, wants to be the complete center of the entire narrative, played by someone who clearly sees this character as an extension of themselves, not just having a couple of traits from their player to make them more relatable to others or to help the player get into their character's head, which I think is absolutely fine, especially if you're playing a roleplay heavy campaign, but a character literally seen as an idealized version of themselves, no more, no less. Anyways, after a long and uncoordinated rant about D&D now sounding stupid and wanting to find a different place he could use Damien, he left the call. So yeah, that happened. In truth, I'm glad this guy didn't end up joining my group if what he was expecting for us was to rewrite the entire campaign and party to focus solely on him. And, without a doubt, Damien is one of the worst characters I've ever personally come across. I've seen a few dark characters work in D&D before, my drow sorcerer friend and few others included. But, having heard of plenty of edgy badasses like this over the years in other people's horror stories, and now seen one for myself in the wild, it just confirms a suspicion I've held for many years. These people don't want to play D&D, a cooperative role-playing game. They want to play XX Cold Steel Lone Wolf XX's personal power fantasy. Try saying that 5 times fast. They want to be destroying every obstacle left, right, and center without ever being challenged or expected to grow. They want to be seen as playing a deep and complex character despite not even coming close to meeting the requirements for either of those. And above all else, I don't think they even want to play a game. I think they just want to be the main character in their own story, where all the other players either don't exist at all, or are just a captive audience to behold how awesome they are. Or rather, how awesome they think they are. That's the one thing that stuck out to me as a big difference between my friends who have played dark characters and people like this guy here. Should I have stuck it out for longer, or just never bothered in the first place? I don't know. Was I foolish to expect more from this guy given I knew what his writing was like? Most likely, yes. I guess I just try not to think that anyone is beyond improvements, so that's on me. Also, without wishing to turn this into an AITA post, part of me wonders if I might have crushed this guy's desire to play. I just didn't want to set him up for failure by making him think that D&D was going to be a solo game where the plot would revolve entirely around his character, even if that was what he wanted. I think what frustrated me the most about Damien's player was that outside all the obvious edge and wannabe badass energy he was attempting to put out, I could see a faint glimmer of potential. A character being manipulated by Bel to seek greater power so he could claim revenge and eventually pave the Archdevil's way to reclaiming Avernus could be a really cool personal storyline, provided it fit the campaign. But that was the problem. If it fit the campaign. Whether the guy had done lore research on D&D and that's what got him into it without realizing how the game itself actually works, or if he did know and was just willfully ignorant of the matter, I don't know. But he clearly expected to only be part of a story tailored to his character and nobody else's. And I know at this point we're all gonna say, mate, why are you even playing D&D? Just write a book. But the scary thing is, reader, he'll probably try. And that concludes the story of Damien Voldegar. OP has said a lot of things here that I think are on a lot of people's minds, definitely on my minds as well. Especially the things about edgy characters and how they are possible, it's just that a lot of people seem to execute them very poorly. And especially the thing about warlocks not necessarily having to be edgy. As I mentioned in the previous video, I once had a celestial warlock that was actually a cute little Kiwi guy that you can see on screen. He was a Kenku flavored as a very short Kiwi. Characters are only limited to your imagination, and if your imagination is only just edgy, main character syndrome stuff, then maybe D&D isn't for you. As said previously, most TTRPGs are cooperative role-playing games. I'm pretty sure most have a prerequisite of about 4 to 6 players. Definitely another lesson to be learned from Damien Voldegar. But what do you think went wrong? Do you think there was anything that Damien did right? Do you think the story was interesting? Let me know down below. Thank you very much for joining me, my friends. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will see you in the next video.